In 1902, construction workers digging a well in Paola, Malta, accidentally punched through the ceiling of a hidden underground chamber. What they had stumbled upon wasn't just any cave. It was the entrance to a 5,000-year-old subterranean necropolis carved entirely from limestone, a structure older than the pyramids of Giza and Stonehenge. Known as the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, this underground complex stretches across 3 levels, featuring intricate passageways, burial chambers, and acoustics so precise that they baffle modern engineers. Inside, archaeologists uncovered the remains of thousands of people, along with mysterious statues like the Sleeping Lady and bizarre artifacts hinting at a forgotten culture's obsession with death and the afterlife. But who built this underground marvel, and why was it abandoned and sealed off for millennia? This is the story of Hypogeum, Malta's ancient subterranean mystery. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni wasn't the work of otherworldly beings. It was crafted by the temple culture, a prehistoric civilization that flourished on Malta between 5000 and 2500 BC. These people didn't leave behind any written records, no epic poems, no carved hieroglyphs. But what they did leave behind were monumental structures that speak louder than words ever could. This was a society that didn't just survive on a tiny, rocky island in the middle of the Mediterranean. They thrived. Picture this: over 30 grand temple complexes scattered across Malta and its sister island, Gozo. Some, like Hagar Shim and Tarshian, still stand tall today, earning the coveted title of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. But while many of these temples reach toward the sky, the Hypogeum is the exception. It plunges deep into the earth. Now here's where things get really interesting. The design of the Hypogeum mirrors that of the above-ground temples. It's as if the people of Malta saw the worlds of the living and the dead as 2 sides of the same coin. Above ground, temples basked in sunlight, with views of the sea and easy access to freshwater springs. Below the ground, in the Hypogeum, the dead rested in cool, dark chambers, surrounded by intricate carvings and mesmerizing acoustics. It's like they built a sacred symmetry, a balance between life and death. And these weren't just random caves. They were meticulously planned, with architectural precision that would make even modern engineers raise an eyebrow. The walls curved in deliberate flowing lines. The chambers are laid out with symmetry and purpose. And then there's the oracle room, where the acoustics are so finely tuned that a simple chant can resonate through the entire complex, sending chills down your spine. It's not hard to imagine ancient priests or shamans standing in that room, their voices amplified in eerie, otherworldly ways. But let's zoom in on the people behind this architectural marvel. Who were they? What did their daily lives look like? For starters, they were remarkably healthy, at least for a Neolithic society. Skeletal remains show few signs of disease, and most people had a full set of teeth. That's pretty impressive when you consider that they didn't have dentists or antibiotics. But what's even more intriguing is their diet. You'd think living on an island they'd feast on fish, right? Wrong. Isotope analysis of their bones reveals little to no seafood consumption. Instead, they focused on farming and raising livestock, sheep, goats, pigs, which played a big role in both their diet and their religious practices. In fact, the temple complexes suggest a society deeply immersed in rituals and ceremonies. At the Tarshian temples, archaeologists uncovered heaps of animal bones, indicating ritual sacrifices or communal feasting. The emphasis on animal offerings, rather than seafood, points to a belief system rooted in agrarian life, a reverence for the land and its creatures. But perhaps the most captivating glimpse into their spiritual world comes from their art. The temple culture had a thing for sculptures, particularly those of rotund, stylized human figures. The most famous of these is the Sleeping Lady, a small, intricately carved statue found in the Hypogeum. She's depicted lying on her side in what appears to be peaceful slumber. Some say she represents a goddess, a symbol of fertility or the afterlife. Others believe she might depict an ancestor or even an ordinary person in eternal rest. Whatever the case, she's a powerful reminder of the spiritual depth of this ancient civilization. Now, for all their ingenuity and artistic flair, the temple culture didn't last forever. Around 2500 BC, their civilization mysteriously collapsed. The temples were abandoned, the rituals ceased, and the Hypogeum was sealed off and forgotten. To this day, no one knows exactly why. Was it climate change, resource depletion, a sudden invasion? Theories abound, but the truth remains buried, just like the Hypogeum itself once was. Fast forward to 1902, and the Hypogeum story takes another dramatic turn. Picture this: a construction crew is digging foundations for a new building when they accidentally punch through the roof of an ancient chamber. At first, no one realizes the magnitude of what they've uncovered, but as archaeologists begin to explore, they quickly understand what they've stumbled upon: something extraordinary. A subterranean labyrinth that had been sealed for millennia, untouched by time. Inside, they found not just the hypnotic architecture and mind-bending acoustics, but also the remains of thousands of individuals. Estimates suggest that as many as 6,000 people were buried in the Hypogeum over the centuries. While that number might be a bit high, some experts believe it's closer to 2,000 or 3,000, it's still an astonishing figure for such a small place. These weren't individual graves, mind you. The dead were laid to rest together in communal chambers, their bones mingling as their memories faded into the earth. And as if the Hypogeum needed more mystery, some of the skulls found inside were elongated, sparking wild theories about ancient aliens and lost civilizations. But let's be real, cranial deformation was a common practice in many ancient cultures, often for aesthetic or ritualistic reasons. It doesn't mean little green men were overseeing construction. What it does mean is that the Hypogeum is more than just an archaeological site. It's a time capsule, a portal into a civilization that achieved incredible things long before the pyramids of Egypt rose from the sands. Today, the Hypogeum stands as one of Malta's most treasured landmarks. Visitor numbers are strictly limited to preserve its fragile interior, but for those lucky enough to descend into its depths, the experience is nothing short of transformative. Standing in the oracle room, hearing your voice echo through the ancient stone, it's easy to feel a connection to the people who built this subterranean wonder over 5,000 years ago. But what else did these ancient builders leave behind? Well, if you've ever read up on Malta's temple culture, chances are you've come across the fat ladies, small figurines of corpulent women, often sitting or reclining, their exaggerated curves carved with surprising finesse. They've been found in necropolises, usually as grave gifts, hinting at their importance in the rituals and beliefs surrounding death and the afterlife. The most famous of these figures is the Sleeping Lady, a beautifully detailed, serene sculpture discovered within the Hypogeum itself. But while the Sleeping Lady is a masterpiece, she's just the tip of the iceberg. Other fat lady statues, like the remains of a once colossal figure that stood nearly 3 meters tall at the Tarsian Temple, that's about 10 feet for those of us who don't do metric, suggest these figures might have been revered as goddesses. Their sheer size and prominence imply a culture deeply invested in fertility and the divine feminine. Yet, the fat ladies are just a fraction of the art created by Malta's ancient temple culture. Alongside these voluptuous forms, archaeologists have found a curious sub-branch of sculptures that depict androgynous, desexed figures. Were these representations of spiritual intermediaries, gods beyond gender, or just artistic experimentation? The truth remains buried with their creators. But things get even stranger. Beyond the serene and the symbolic, Malta's ancient artists also ventured into the downright bizarre. Take the grotesque figures, sculptures of human heads with no bodies, perched precariously on legs that sprout from their chins, or a figure with the head of a pig, blending human and animal features in unsettling ways. And then there's the pièce de résistance, a sculpture of a head emerging from a gigantic phallus. Yes, you heard that right. It seems that ancient Maltese had no shortage of creativity, or humor. Speaking of phalluses, the temple culture seemed to have a particular fascination with fertility symbols. Much like many other ancient civilizations, they worshipped both male and female representations of fertility. Phallic symbols were as common as the buxom fat ladies. This duality suggests a belief system where life, death, and rebirth were intertwined, celebrated through art, architecture, and ritual. But who exactly were the people doing all this worshipping? What kind of belief system did they follow? To answer that, we need to venture into the murky waters of informed speculation. After all, without written records, much of what we know comes from interpreting the artifacts and structures left behind. Starting around the time the Hypogeum was constructed, Malta's religious practices seemed to evolve into what can only be described as a death cult. Now, we don't mean cult in the modern sense of the word. There were no secret suicide pacts or UFO rendezvous, but the focus on funerary rites, rituals, and the afterlife became the defining feature of the society. In the early phases, families were buried together in simple rock-cut alcoves, often in pre-existing caves. But by the Tarsian phase around 3000 BC, death had become a grand communal event. Massive structures like the Hypogeum were dedicated entirely to burial practices. Ritual feasts, sacrifices, and elaborate ceremonies weren't just occasional events, they were central to the culture. As time went on, these funerary practices became even more elaborate. Family burials were replaced by mass graves, with bones carefully arranged and organized. In some cases, the graves were divided by gender. Women buried on one level, often with grave goods like figurines and amulets, while men were interred elsewhere, typically without such offerings. This has led some scholars to speculate that the Temple period Malta may have been a matriarchal society, where women held greater religious or social power. While we can't say for certain whether the society was matriarchal, it's clear that priests or a religious caste played a significant role. Non-local items such as green stones and pottery from other regions have been found hidden deep within temples and necropolises, suggesting they were considered sacred or secret. It is possible that only the priestly elite knew about Malta's connections with the outside world. Imagine a society where common folk were unaware of trade with other civilizations, their entire worldview carefully curated by those in religious power. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Edo period Japan managed to isolate much of its population from outside influence for centuries. Regardless of whether priests wielded absolute power, one thing is undeniable. The construction of temples and necropolises took precedence over everything else. Resources, labor, and time were poured into these monumental projects. Agriculture, infrastructure, and other aspects of daily life seemingly took a back seat. And this might have been the society's undoing. By 2500 BC, as the Temple period drew to a close, evidence suggests that Malta's environment was under pressure. Diets deteriorated, possibly due to overfarming or climate change. The once thriving temple complexes were abandoned. The Hypogeum, along with Malta's other grand structures, fell into disuse. The temple culture vanished, leaving no clear successor. Whether it was from environmental collapse, resource depletion, or societal strain from their obsessive focus on religious practices, we may never know. What we do know is that the Hypogeum remained hidden for thousands of years. Its sealed chambers preserved it from the ravages of time and human interference, until the 20th century rolled around and, well, humans did what humans do best. In 1902, construction workers in the Maltese town of Paola accidentally punched through the roof of the Hypogeum while digging a well. You'd think stumbling upon one of the world's greatest archaeological treasures would be a cause for celebration, right? Well, not exactly. The construction company's boss tried to cover it up so work could continue. In the process, the Hypogeum was left exposed, and locals made off with artifacts, not realizing their historical value. Ancient bones were even carted away to be used as fertilizer. Yes, really. When authorities finally stepped in, things didn't get much better. Father Emmanuel Magri, an ethnographer, was brought in to oversee excavations in 1903, but he died suddenly in 1907, taking his notes with him to the grave. This left a chaotic mess. Artifacts were removed without any record of where they were found, erasing valuable context that archaeologists rely on to piece together history. It wasn't until Sir Themistocles Zamet arrived on the scene that things started to turn around. A pioneering archaeologist, Zamet meticulously cataloged the remaining artifacts and laid the groundwork for much of what we know about the Hypogeum today. But even his work wasn't safe from misinterpretation. In passing, Zamet mentioned that some of the skulls found in the Hypogeum were elongated. At the time, he was simply referring to an old classification system, but modern conspiracy theorists ran wild with it. Ancient aliens? Of course, they'd say. But as we've already established, the ingenuity of Malta's ancient builders is far more interesting than any extraterrestrial theory. Today, after a century after its rediscovery, the Hypogeum remains a testament to the brilliance and mystery of Malta's temple culture. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and its limited access ensures it remains preserved for future generations. But beyond the preservation efforts, the Hypogeum stands as a silent message from the distant past. A message carved into stone, reminding us that even in the absence of written words, the people of this ancient civilization had something profound to say. If you found this journey into Malta's ancient past fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on more stories from history's hidden corners. And hey, do drop a comment below. What do you think happened to the temple culture? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.